For years she fed a nameless man, until on her wedding day, 15 knights appeared. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main character. Elinor Hart had always been a girl of simple pleasures, born into a family with modest means, where every meal was earned through hard work, and every smile was a quiet victory. Her family's estate had once been prosperous, but now, it barely survived under the weight of mounting debts. Every night, as she sat by the hearth, her eyes would wander to the door, waiting for the arrival of someone she had never truly known. A man, a nameless man. For years, Elinor had secretly fed him. Her heart was drawn to him, even though he had never once spoken his name. Every evening, she would slip out after dinner, carrying a basket of bread and soup, and make her way to the old stone wall at the edge of the village. There, she would leave the food, and there, she would find him. A stranger, a man with no past, hidden away behind layers of cloaks and shadows. She had never asked him why he came or who he was. It didn't matter. His presence, though silent, comforted her. His eyes, though always guarded, spoke a language she had come to understand. A language of loneliness, of forgotten promises, and of a shared understanding that neither of them could speak aloud. One day, the inevitable happened. Elinor's father, a man bound by his own mistakes, arranged for her to marry a man she had never met. Lord Hugh Carow, the son of a wealthy and influential family, had come to claim her as his bride in order to settle her family's debts. She had no choice in the matter. Her father's financial ruin was her own to bear, and the wedding was the price she had to pay. On the day of her wedding, Elinor walked into the church with her heart heavy, knowing that she was leaving behind the only world she had ever known. A world where she had freely chosen to care for the nameless man, and where her choices had meant something. But as she stood at the altar, her eyes cast downward, avoiding the gaze of her soon-to-be husband, a strange thought crossed her mind. Could I choose differently today? The sound of footsteps approaching her broke her from the trance of thought. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly lifted her gaze to meet the eyes of Lord Hugh. He smiled, but there was no warmth in his eyes, only cold calculation. The ceremony began, the vows were exchanged, and she found herself trapped in a life she never chose. Yet, deep in her soul, she could feel a shift in the air. Something had changed. There was a whisper of a new beginning, a twist of fate she had never anticipated. And then, in that moment, as the final words were spoken, the church doors burst open. A chill swept through the room, and there, standing in the doorway, was the nameless man she had fed for so long. But now, he was no longer a nameless figure. He stood tall, dressed in armor, his eyes burning with purpose. The air seemed to hum with the weight of his presence, and as Elinor locked eyes with him, she felt a surge of recognition. It wasn't just the man she had fed all these years. It was him. And with him were 15 knights, their armor gleaming in the light of the church, their faces solemn. The world seemed to stand still as the truth unfolded before her eyes. The man she had nourished, the man she had cared for, was no ordinary beggar. He was Adrian Ravenshold, the heir to the once great Ravenshold estate, lost and believed to be dead. And with his return, everything Elinor had known was about to change. The wedding, the life she had been forced into, the future she thought was set, all of it, was now at risk. And the one question she couldn't stop asking herself was, what would she do now? Elinor stood frozen in the doorway of the church, her heart racing in her chest as the cold winds howled outside. She had never imagined this moment would come. The very man she had secretly fed for years, the man she had given her kindness to, was now standing before her in all his glory, not as a nameless beggar, but as Adrian Ravenshold, the heir to the Ravenshold estate. 15 knights, all in gleaming armor, stood behind him, their eyes fixed on her, as if waiting for her to make the next move. The shock of his sudden appearance, the reality of his identity, crashed over her like a wave. The room fell silent as Adrian's gaze locked with hers, and for a moment, It felt as though time had stopped. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears, drowning out the whispers of the crowd, the murmurs of disbelief that spread like wildfire through the church. This was no longer a simple wedding. This was a turning point. A choice. Adrian's voice cut through the silence, steady and commanding. "I am Adrian Ravenshold," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I have come to take what is mine." Elinor's breath caught in her throat. She had heard the name, of course. Ravenshold was a name whispered in the corridors of nobility, a title that had once commanded respect and power. But she had never imagined it would be tied to the very man she had been helping in secret. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information. He had been the one who had disappeared all those years ago, presumed dead. But now, here he was, standing before her, alive, and with a claim to her heart. The words "mine" and "take" echoed in her mind, but they did not fill her with fear. No, they filled her with something else, a sense of fate, of destiny. But was it her destiny to be claimed by him? Or was it her destiny to follow the path laid out by her family, by the debts her father had accrued? The choice was hers to make, but in that moment, she felt as though the choice had already been made for her. Adrian stepped forward, his presence overpowering, and for the first time since he had arrived, he spoke directly to her. "I've waited long enough," he said, his voice low but full of intensity. "The Ravenshold name is mine to reclaim, and with it, the life you've been promised is no longer yours to keep." Elinor's knees nearly buckled under the weight of his words, but she held her ground. She had been raised to be strong, to stand tall in the face of adversity, and this was no different. She had no idea what was happening around her, but she knew one thing. She was no longer the girl who had fed a nameless man by the stone wall. She was a woman standing on the precipice of a new life. The room remained silent as Adrian continued, his gaze still locked on hers. "I offer you a choice," he said, his tone softening ever so slightly. "You can remain with your family, continue to live in the life they have built for you. Or you can come with me, leave all of this behind, and embrace a future where you stand at my side. The choice is yours, Elinor." For a long moment, Elinor could only stare at him, her heart torn between two worlds. The world she had known, a world of obligations, of forced marriages and duties she could never escape, and the world Adrian offered her, a world of freedom, of power, and of an uncertain future. She had always known this day would come, but she had never imagined it would come like this. And as the eyes of the entire church were fixed upon her, Elinor knew that this was the moment that would define her. The moment that would decide not only her future, but her fate. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached for the hem of her wedding gown, the fabric cold beneath her fingers. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but there was one truth that stood above all the others. She was not the woman she had once been. She was not the girl who had fed a nameless man out of kindness and curiosity. She was a woman who had the power to choose her destiny. Slowly, she raised her head to meet Adrian's gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "I choose," she whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "I choose to leave this life behind." Adrian's expression softened, and for the first time, Elinor saw the vulnerability beneath the mask he had worn for so long. He stepped toward her, his hand extending as though to help her take the first step into this new world. "Then come with me," he said simply, his voice full of the promise of something unknown, something powerful. Elinor hesitated for only a moment before she placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his touch, the strength in his grip. And with that, she took the first step into a new life, a life that was no longer bound by the chains of her past, but one that was filled with uncertainty, with power, and with a future she would carve for herself. The moment she stepped forward, the room erupted in whispers, in shock, in disbelief. But Elinor was no longer listening. She had made her choice, and nothing, not even the world itself, could take it away from her. Elinor's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped out of the church, her hand still in Adrian's. The wind howled through the streets of the village, but it no longer mattered. The world around her seemed distant, a mere backdrop to the monumental shift that had just occurred. She had chosen to leave behind everything she had ever known, everything she had ever been told to accept. The people who had watched her walk down the aisle in a wedding gown, expecting a different ending, now watched her as she walked away with the man who had been a stranger and a savior all at once. The first few steps were surreal. She felt as if her legs might give out beneath her, as though the weight of her decision might crush her. But Adrian's hand, firm around hers, gave her strength. With every step, she felt more certain. As they approached the horses waiting for them outside the church, Adrian spoke, his voice low and steady. "You've made the right choice, Elinor." She didn't respond at first. She couldn't find the words to express what she was feeling, to convey the turmoil inside of her. Everything was happening so quickly. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about the life she had left behind, the life of duty, of obligation. Adrian helped her onto the horse, his hands gentle but insistent, as though guiding her into the unknown. "Where are we going?" Elinor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he mounted his own horse, and with a swift movement, they were off. The journey was silent at first, the only sounds the clopping of hooves and the wind that seemed to pull them forward. Adrian guided the horses through the village and out onto the road leading to Ravenshold, his family's estate, a place she had only heard of in whispers. It was hours before they reached their destination, and as they did, Elinor could see the imposing structure looming ahead, its stone walls dark against the night sky. The estate was grand, but there was a coldness about it that matched the storm brewing in her heart. As they approached the main entrance, Elinor could see that the house was still, as if it had been waiting for them. The gates opened with a creak, and they entered the courtyard. A few servants appeared, their eyes wide with curiosity as they watched the new arrivals. Adrian dismounted and helped Elinor down, his touch lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. "Welcome to Ravenshold," he said softly, his gaze steady on her. Elinor didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this new life, this new identity, but there was something in Adrian's eyes that made her believe it was the only choice she could have made. "This place," she said finally, her voice uncertain. "It's so different from everything I've known." Adrian's expression softened. "It is," he agreed. "But here, you won't have to live under anyone's thumb. You won't have to be anyone's pawn." Elinor nodded, her heart still heavy with the weight of what she had left behind, but also with a strange sense of relief. She was free. As they entered the grand hall, the warmth of the fire in the hearth greeted them, and Elinor could feel her muscles relax for the first time that day. The house was massive, full of dark wood and towering ceilings, but it felt empty, as though it had been waiting for something or someone to fill it. "I know this is all new for you," Adrian said, leading her into a lavish sitting room. "But I promise you, you won't be alone here. I'm here." His words were quiet but firm, and for the first time since they had met, Elinor felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't sure what this new life would bring, but she knew one thing. It was her life to live. And for the first time, she felt like she might actually have the chance to live it. She looked up at Adrian, her eyes meeting his. There was something different about him now, something that had changed since the day she had met him in the shadows of the village. He wasn't just the man who had been fed in secret, the man whose identity had been hidden from her. He was someone else now. He was Adrian Ravenshold, and she had chosen him. The weight of the decision still hung over her, but she could no longer deny the truth. She was where she was meant to be. And as the night wore on, and the fire flickered in the hearth, she felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. It was the beginning of something new. But what that something would be, Elinor had yet to discover. The days that followed Elinor's arrival at Ravenshold were a blur of newness and uncertainty, but there was a strange comfort in the constant rhythm of life at the estate. Each morning, she was greeted by the soft chime of the bell signaling the start of a new day, and each evening, the warmth of the hearth and the quiet solitude of her chambers reminded her that she had, indeed, left the world she had known behind. The vast halls of Ravenshold, though still and often shrouded in shadow, began to feel less like a prison and more like a place she could make her own. Adrian, despite his overwhelming presence, had given her space, allowing her to find her footing in this unfamiliar world. But it wasn't long before she noticed the subtle shift in their interactions. They began to share meals together, the silence between them no longer awkward but comfortable. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, exchanging only a few words at first, but slowly the conversation began to flow. "I've been meaning to ask you," Elinor said one evening, her voice tentative as she picked at her dinner. "Why didn't you tell me who you were from the start? Why all the secrecy?" Adrian's gaze softened as he set his glass down, considering her words. He had been waiting for this question, for the moment she would ask. "At the time, I wasn't sure I could trust you," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "I was lost and I had no idea how to explain my past to you. It wasn't until I realized how much I depended on you, how much you had already given me, that I knew I couldn't keep hiding who I really was." Elinor nodded, understanding more than she expected. She, too, had hidden parts of herself, parts of her life and her heart that had always been closed off to others. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian's gaze grew intense, his eyes never leaving hers. "Now," he said, "I'm not hiding anything anymore. Not from you." His words, simple as they were, carried a weight that settled deep in Elinor's chest. She wasn't sure why, but in that moment, something shifted between them, something that felt like the beginning of something more. The days passed in a haze of new beginnings, but the unease still lingered in the back of her mind. Ravenshold was her new home, yes, but the memories of the life she had left behind were never far from her thoughts. One evening, as the sky darkened and the last rays of sunlight faded from the horizon, Elinor wandered through the estate, her steps slow and deliberate. She found herself drawn to the gardens that Adrian had once mentioned, the ones his late wife had loved. The air was cool, and the path was bathed in the soft glow of lantern light. She could hear the rustle of leaves in the trees, the quiet hum of the wind, and the soft croon of night creatures in the distance. The garden was beautiful, its beauty tempered by the heavy sadness that seemed to linger there, like a shadow. Elinor wandered further into the garden, her fingers brushing against the petals of the flowers, the scent of jasmine and rose filling her senses. She paused before a small fountain, its water still and unmoving, reflecting the light of the moon. There, in the quiet stillness, she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Adrian standing just a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "I see you found my wife's favorite spot," he said softly. Elinor nodded, unsure of how to respond. She could feel the weight of his words, the weight of the memories that clung to this place. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of her own unspoken thoughts. Adrian moved closer, his eyes dark and distant as he gazed at the fountain. "She loved it here," he said, almost to himself. "She spent hours here, tending to the flowers, making sure everything was perfect." There was a pause before he looked at Elinor, his gaze steady. "She was the perfect lady, the perfect wife. But she's gone now." His words hung in the air between them, heavy and full of grief. Elinor's heart ached for him, for the loss he had endured, for the weight of the memories he carried with him. She wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but the words felt inadequate. She didn't know how to ease the pain that seemed to radiate from him. Instead, she simply stood there, beside him, sharing the silence. The moment stretched between them, long and heavy, until Adrian finally spoke again. "I never thought I would find someone who could bring me peace again," he said, his voice rough. "But then you came into my life. You made me realize that maybe I don't have to carry this burden alone." Elinor's heart skipped a beat as she looked at him. She had never seen him so vulnerable, so open. For the first time, she saw the man behind the mask, the man who had been broken by loss, who had been hiding behind the walls he had built around himself. And in that moment, she understood something she hadn't before. This was not just a man who had saved her from her past. This was a man who needed saving too. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the night air. "You don't have to carry this alone." For a moment, neither of them spoke, and then, as if on instinct, Adrian reached out, taking her hand in his. The touch was tentative, unsure, but it felt like a promise that they would face the future together, whatever it might bring. As the night stretched on, and the garden grew darker, Elinor felt something shift within her. She had chosen this life, she had chosen him, and in that moment, she knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. Days passed at Ravenshold, and Elinor felt the weight of her new life pressing down on her. But with it came a strange sense of freedom. Adrian had kept his word, giving her the space to settle in, but his presence was always near, steady, unwavering. The mansion, once cold and imposing, began to feel more like home with each passing day. As the seasons changed and the first signs of spring appeared, the gardens Adrian had shared with his late wife began to bloom again, and Elinor found herself spending hours walking through the flowers, tending to the plants, and learning the rhythms of her new life. She had come to accept that this was where she belonged, but the ghosts of her past still haunted her. Adrian, too, had his own battles to fight, and the silence between them, though comfortable, was a constant reminder of the walls they both carried with them. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, Adrian approached Elinor in the garden. She was crouched by the rose bushes, carefully trimming away dead branches, when she heard his footsteps on the gravel path. "You've been spending a lot of time here lately," he said, his voice soft but full of meaning. Elinor glanced up at him, the dim light casting long shadows across his face. "I find peace here," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart raced at the thought of their growing connection. Adrian stood silently for a moment, watching her work, and then spoke again, his tone more serious than she had ever heard it before. "I know you've been hiding something from me, Elinor. I can feel it." His words hit her like a blow, and for a brief moment, she froze, unsure of how to respond. She had kept her past carefully guarded, not wanting to burden him with the details of her life before Ravenshold, before him. But now, standing there in the fading light, she realized he was right. The weight of her secrets was too much to carry alone. She stood up slowly, wiping the dirt from her hands, and turned to face him. "There are things in my past that I haven't shared with you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Things I thought would be better left in the past." Adrian stepped closer, his expression unreadable, but his eyes soft with understanding. "You don't have to tell me everything, Elinor," he said gently. "But you need to stop carrying it all alone. Whatever it is, whatever you're hiding, you don't have to. Keep it buried here." He placed a hand on her shoulder, and for a moment, she felt the warmth of his touch spread through her. It was as if his presence alone could make everything feel lighter, more bearable. "I'm not asking you to forget your past," he continued, "but don't let it define you. Not here. Not with me." Elinor swallowed hard, feeling the lump in her throat. She had never allowed anyone to see the parts of her that were broken, that had been shattered by years of struggle and sacrifice. She had always carried the weight alone, thinking it was her burden to bear. But Adrian's words, his simple offer of understanding, made her realize she didn't have to carry it all. Not anymore. "I'm scared," she whispered, the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. "Scared of what you might think, scared of what you might see if I tell you everything." Adrian's gaze softened, and he took another step closer, his hand now resting on her arm. "There's nothing you could tell me that would make me think any less of you, Elinor. I've seen you at your lowest, and I've seen you rise above it all. That's who you are to me, not the things you've been through, not the things you've lost." Elinor closed her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the raw emotion in his voice. She had never allowed herself to be this vulnerable, never let anyone in to see the truth of her past, but here, with Adrian, it felt like she could finally breathe, finally let go. "I'm not asking you to forgive me for my past," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I want to be someone who deserves this life with you." Adrian's hand slid gently to her cheek, lifting her face so that their eyes met once more. "You don't have to deserve it, Elinor," he said softly. "You already do." In that moment, Elinor felt as though the weight of years of silence had been lifted. She no longer had to carry her past alone, no longer had to hide the parts of herself that she thought were too broken to be seen. With Adrian, she could be whole again, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Adrian smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made her heart flutter. "Come," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "Let me show you the rest of Ravenshold." Elinor followed him, her heart light and full of hope. As they walked together through the gardens, the night air cool against their skin, Elinor knew that she had found something worth holding on to. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to face it. She was ready to step into the unknown, to walk beside Adrian, and to finally embrace the life she had been waiting for. As the days passed, Elinor found herself settling more into the rhythms of life at Ravenshold. But something lingered in the back of her mind, an unsettled feeling that she couldn't quite shake. The estate was magnificent, far more than she had ever imagined, and Adrian, despite his quiet intensity, made sure she was comfortable. The servants had all been kind, though there was a subtle undercurrent of curiosity in their eyes, as if they were watching her, waiting for something to happen. Yet, even with the luxury surrounding her, Elinor couldn't help but feel the weight of her decision. The life she had left behind, the obligations, the duty she had carried for so long, still haunted her. It was not so easily cast off. Adrian noticed the change in her, the way her smile seemed a little less bright, the way she withdrew into herself at times. He didn't push her, but he was always close, always present, his quiet support a constant in the chaos of her emotions. One evening, after a long day spent in the gardens, Elinor returned to the sitting room to find Adrian waiting by the fire, a glass of wine in hand. He had never been one for grand gestures, but his presence, the way he seemed to always know when she needed him, was a comfort she couldn't deny. "I've been thinking," Elinor said softly, her voice barely above a whisper as she approached him. Adrian looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, the room felt still, as if the world outside had stopped moving. "About what?" he asked, his tone warm, yet laced with curiosity. She hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts, the words suddenly feeling so much harder to say than they had before. "About my past," she admitted. "About everything I left behind. I thought I could forget it, that coming here would be enough, but I still feel the weight of it." Adrian set his glass down on the table and stood, closing the distance between them. He didn't say anything at first, but reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing lightly over her cheeks. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." Elinor's breath caught in her throat as she met his gaze. She had known he was kind, but hearing him speak those words made her realize just how much he understood her, how much he truly saw her. It wasn't just his title, his wealth, or his strength that had drawn her to him. It was his ability to see through the walls she had built around herself, to see the woman beneath the pain. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "I'm scared that no matter how far I go, no matter how much time passes, my past will follow me." Adrian's eyes softened, his hands gently pulling her closer. "Your past doesn't define you," he said firmly. "You define who you are, Elinor. And right now, you are someone who is choosing a new path, a new life. And that, my love, is all that matters." His words were like a balm to the raw, wounded parts of her heart, and she felt the tears that had threatened to fall for so long finally spill over. She didn't know when she had started crying, but Adrian was there, his arms around her, his comfort a steady presence as she let go of the fears she had kept bottled inside. The next few days passed in a blur, but with each passing moment, Elinor felt lighter. Adrian's presence, his unspoken support, gave her the courage to face the shadows of her past, and she slowly began to allow herself to live in the present. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but with Adrian by her side, it felt possible. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, the moonlight casting long shadows over the flowers, Elinor looked at him, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with a depth of emotion she couldn't quite put into words. Adrian smiled, his gaze gentle. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "You've always had the strength within you. You just needed someone to remind you of it." Elinor smiled, her heart swelling with affection for him. She had never imagined that she would find a love like this, a love that was both gentle and strong, patient yet passionate. She had spent so many years thinking she was not worthy of such love, but Adrian had shown her that she was. As the days turned into weeks, Elinor felt more at home at Ravenshold, more at peace with the life she had chosen. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the past would creep in and try to pull her back, but each time, Adrian was there, a steady hand at her back, reminding her that the future was hers to create. And for the first time in her life, Elinor truly believed it. She had found something in herself, in Adrian, and in this life she had chosen that she had never known before: peace. The peace that came with letting go of the past, the peace that came with embracing a future full of possibility. And in that peace, she had found a love that was more powerful than anything she had ever known. As the weeks passed, Elinor and Adrian settled into a new rhythm of life at Ravenshold. But there was still something lingering in the air. Despite the warmth that had slowly bloomed between them, a shadow of uncertainty still clung to the edges of their days. It wasn't just the lingering memories of Elinor's past, but the secrets Adrian still held close, the ones that he had yet to share with her. She knew there were things about him, about his family, that he had yet to reveal, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story than he was letting on. Adrian, for his part, had become more distant in recent days. It wasn't that he was cold or unkind, but there was a quiet storm brewing inside him, something he was struggling to keep hidden. Elinor noticed it during their shared meals, when his gaze would drift to the windows, or when he would suddenly fall silent in the middle of a conversation, lost in thoughts she couldn't reach. She didn't know how to reach him when he shut himself off like that, but she knew that it wasn't the same Adrian she had come to know. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, Elinor found herself walking alone in the garden, her mind racing with questions she had never asked. The garden, once a place of peace for her, now felt like a maze, the shadows stretching across the path as the sun set behind the trees. She was deep in thought when she heard footsteps behind her, and she turned to find Adrian standing there, his expression unreadable. "Elinor," he said, his voice soft but filled with something she couldn't quite place. "We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat, and she nodded, unsure of what was coming. They walked together in silence for a few moments, the air between them thick with unspoken words. Finally, Adrian stopped and turned to face her, his eyes dark with emotion. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, his voice low. Elinor felt a tightness in her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked. Adrian took a deep breath, his jaw clenched as if he were holding back something powerful. "Before I disappeared, before I came to you as the man I am now, I was not just a man lost in the world. I was a man running from a war, from a family that wanted to destroy me." His words were sharp, raw, and they cut through the calm of the evening like a blade. Elinor's eyes widened as she took in his words. "A war? What are you talking about?" Adrian's eyes darkened even more. "My family, Elinor," he said, his voice trembling. "They have always wanted control, power, and they would do anything to get it. They didn't care who they hurt, who they killed, as long as they stayed on top. And when I refused to be a part of it, when I refused to play their games, they tried to kill me." The shock of his words hit Elinor like a punch to the gut. "They try to kill you?" she whispered, unable to fully comprehend what he was saying. Adrian nodded slowly. "Yes, and they would still be after me, after both of us, if they knew I was alive, if they knew I was here, with you." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the truth he had just revealed. Elinor felt a surge of emotions, fear, confusion, disbelief, but most of all, a deep, aching sympathy for Adrian. He had carried this burden alone for so long, and now, here he was, letting her see a part of him that he had kept buried. She reached out slowly, her hand brushing his arm. "Adrian," she said softly, "you don't have to carry this alone anymore. We'll figure this out, together." Adrian's eyes softened at her words, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to relax, just a little. "I don't want you to be dragged into this, Elinor," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I don't want you to be in danger because of me." Elinor shook her head firmly. "You're not getting rid of me that easily," she said with a small, determined smile. "We're in this together now. Whatever comes next, we'll face it side by side." Adrian looked at her for a long moment, his gaze filled with something unspoken, something deep. Then, without another word, he pulled her into a tight embrace, and Elinor felt the tension in his body melt away as he held her close. It was in that moment that she realized, truly realized, how much Adrian needed her. Not just for her love, but for her strength, her willingness to stand by him when the world seemed ready to crumble around them. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that they would face whatever dangers lay ahead, together. As they stood in the garden, holding each other, the night seemed to stretch on forever, but in that stillness, in that moment of quiet, they found something stronger than fear: trust. And with that trust, They would face the future, whatever it may hold. Days turned into weeks, and as the seasons changed, so too did the atmosphere at Ravenshold. The estate, which had once felt like a cold, unwelcoming fortress, now felt alive with possibilities. Elinor and Adrian, despite the burdens they both carried, found comfort in each other's presence, a solace in the quiet moments they shared. However, despite the peace they had found, the shadow of Adrian's past still loomed over them, a constant reminder that their lives would never be entirely free from danger. The tension in the air was palpable, but neither of them spoke of it openly. Adrian had taken to spending more time in the study, poring over documents and letters that seemed to carry with them the weight of his family's legacy. Elinor had noticed the subtle change in him, how his usual calm had given way to moments of intense focus, as if he were preparing for something, but she didn't know what. She had learned to give him space, to let him sort through his thoughts in his own time, but she could feel the growing unease between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elinor found herself walking the grounds once again, drawn by a need to clear her mind. The cool evening air felt refreshing against her skin, and she let it wash over her as she wandered through the gardens. She found herself standing near the fountain, the same place where Adrian had opened up to her weeks ago, and it was there that he found her, his footsteps soft on the gravel path. He approached her cautiously, his eyes reflecting the fading light of day. "Elinor," he said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, sensing the gravity in his words. "What is it?" she asked, her heart quickening. Adrian paused, his expression unreadable as he took a step closer. "My family, they're not done with me yet," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They've been looking for me, trying to track me down since the day I left. And now, I fear that they've finally found me." Elinor's heart sank as she listened to his words, the weight of the danger he faced pressing heavily on her chest. "What does this mean for us?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Adrian took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of determination and fear. "It means that we can't stay here, not for long," he said, his voice firm. "If they know where I am, it's only a matter of time before they come for us. And I won't let you be caught in the crossfire." Elinor felt a surge of panic rising in her chest, but she pushed it down, steeling herself. She couldn't let fear take over, not now. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at her insides. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, his gaze filled with something she couldn't quite read. "We leave," he said quietly. "We leave Ravenshold behind and go somewhere safe, somewhere they can't find us." Elinor nodded slowly, the decision settling in her mind. She had known this day might come, had known that the life she had chosen with Adrian could never be completely free of danger, but hearing it from him, seeing the resolve in his eyes, made it all too real. She didn't want to leave the only place that had ever felt like home, but she knew it was the only choice they had. "I'll go wherever you go," she said softly, her voice full of conviction. "We'll face this together, Adrian. We always have." Adrian stepped closer, his hand finding hers, and for a moment, they stood there in the quiet of the evening, the weight of the decision hanging in the air between them. "I don't deserve you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "But I'm glad you're with me, Elinor." She squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with affection for him. "You deserve everything, Adrian," she said, her voice steady, "and I'm not going anywhere." They stood there for a moment longer, the reality of what lay ahead settling in around them. But even in the face of uncertainty, Elinor felt a sense of peace. No matter where they went, no matter what came next, they would face it together. And that was enough. The next few days were filled with preparations. Adrian worked tirelessly to ensure that everything was in place, making arrangements to leave Ravenshold and disappear into the night. Elinor helped as best she could, packing their things and ensuring that nothing was left behind that could be traced. It was a strange feeling, knowing they were about to leave everything behind, but as they packed the last of their belongings, Elinor couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve. They were leaving, yes, but they were also beginning something new, something that they would shape together. On the night they left, the house was still and quiet, the only sound the distant howling of the wind. They slipped out of Ravenshold in the dead of night, leaving behind the life they had once known, but taking with them everything that mattered, each other. And as the gates of Ravenshold closed behind them, Elinor took a deep breath, knowing that the road ahead would not be easy, but with Adrian by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The road they traveled was long and winding, and the journey was not without its difficulties. Yet, as the days passed and the landscape around them shifted, Elinor found herself more and more at peace with the path they had chosen. Adrian had kept his promise. They had left Ravenshold behind, escaping the shadows of his past, and were now forging a future together, one step at a time. They had traveled under the cover of darkness for days, moving from one small village to the next, never staying in one place for too long. Adrian had contacts, old allies from his days before he disappeared, and they had helped him stay one step ahead of the dangers that lingered behind them. But the danger was always there, lurking just beyond the horizon. Elinor had come to understand that no matter how far they ran, they would never truly be free of the past. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were together, that they had each other. It was more than Elinor had ever dared hope for, and more than she had ever believed she deserved. As they settled into a small cottage on the outskirts of a quiet town, Elinor began to feel a sense of normalcy, a feeling that had been absent from her life for so long. The little house was humble, with a small garden out back where Adrian had begun to plant herbs and flowers. The peace of the place soothed her, and as the days turned into weeks, she found herself settling into a rhythm, waking each morning to the smell of fresh bread baking, the sound of Adrian working in the garden. It was a simple life, but it was the life she had always dreamed of. Yet, as much as she had come to love their new life, the shadow of Adrian's past still loomed over them. He had tried to push it away, to bury it, but it was always there, a constant reminder of the danger they faced. It was one evening as the sun set behind the hills, that Adrian came to her with the weight of that past pressing on his shoulders. Elinor was sitting by the fire, knitting a shawl, when he entered the room, his face drawn, his eyes troubled. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. Adrian hesitated for a moment, then sat down beside her. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "There's only so much running we can do. Sooner or later, they'll find us, and I won't let that happen to you. I have to face my past, Elinor. I have to put an end to this." Elinor's heart tightened as she listened to him. She knew what he meant. He couldn't keep running forever. The family that had cast him aside, the family that had wanted him dead, would never stop hunting him until they had gotten what they wanted. And yet, the thought of losing him, of him going back into that world, filled her with dread. "What do you mean, put an end to this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Adrian turned to her, his expression pained. "I'll go to them. I'll face them head on, and end this once and for all." Elinor felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She couldn't let him do this. She had just found him, just begun to build a life with him. The idea of him going back to that dangerous world was more than she could bear. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. "No," she said firmly, her voice breaking. "I won't let you go. We can't go back to that life. We've come so far. We've built something together. Please, Adrian, don't do this." Adrian's face softened, and he took her hand in both of his, holding it to his chest. "I know you're scared," he said quietly, "and I don't want to leave you. But this is something I have to do. It's the only way we can ever truly be free." Tears welled in Elinor's eyes, and she squeezed his hand tighter, unwilling to let go. "But what if something happens to you? What if they hurt you again? What if?" Her voice faltered as the fear took over. Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Nothing is going to happen to me, Elinor. I swear it. I have to do this for us, for our future. But I need you to believe in me. I need you to trust that I will come back to you." She closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her, but a part of her couldn't help but feel the gnawing fear in the pit of her stomach. She had never wanted to live in fear again, never wanted to feel the way she had when she had been bound by duty and obligation. But now, as Adrian spoke, she realized that his fight was also hers, and that together they could face whatever came next. "I trust you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I believe in you, Adrian. But promise me you'll come back to me." Adrian kissed the top of her head gently, his arms tightening around her. "I promise, Elinor. I'll come back to you. I'll fight for us." The next morning, As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Adrian set out on his journey, leaving Elinor behind to wait. She watched him disappear into the distance, the weight of his promise hanging heavy in the air. And as the days turned to weeks, she held on to the belief that he would return, that their love, their life, would survive whatever storms came their way. But in her heart, there was always the fear, the uncertainty of the unknown, and the longing for the moment when they would finally be free. Until then, Elinor waited, knowing that love, no matter the distance, was the one thing that would always bring them back together.